Hello again from Metro Manila, the Philippines, Southeastern Asia, and happy late Saturday evening local time from my main channel. I hope and pray that you're all doing well, you're healthy and safe. Almost exactly 10 years ago, on July the 22nd, 2011, the peace of Norway, a long and narrow country in Scandinavia, Northern Europe, was shattered within a matter of hours by two terrorist attacks. The first one happened in the center of Oslo, the Norwegian capital, in the government bloc, where a bomb left by the far-right extremist terrorist and anti-Islam agitator Anders Behring Breivik exploded, killing 8 people. He then proceeded, dressed in a fake police uniform and armed heavily, to the island of Utøya, where the Labour or Social Democratic Party's young people were having their summer camp amid chilly and rainy weather, but they were used to that. And there he posed as a police officer and claimed that he wanted to protect the people there from the terrorists. But within a matter of minutes, it was realized by the people on the island that indeed he was a terrorist, and he was out there to kill as many people as possible. A total of 69 people he managed to kill before surrendering to the real police officers who finally arrived there. He had targeted these attacks so that the emergency response would be slow, and since Norway, like quite many other European countries, has July as the main holiday month for those who are working more or less regularly, and of course for the students, that was why, for example, the police helicopters that could have rescued at least many, if not most, of the victims on Utøya were not available, and neither was the ferry for enough hours in order for the rescue operations to get underway. On the other hand, the fact that most Norwegian workers, including the Norwegian politicians like the then Prime Minister, Mr. Jens Stoltenberg, were on holiday, this meant that no government members and nor any members of parliament were killed. The prime target of Mr. Breivik on Utøya was Norway's first female prime minister, Mrs. Gro Harlem Brundtland of the Labour Party, who had been in office for about 10 years between 1981 and 1996. However, she had shortly before his arrival left the island. Mr. Breivik had grown up in a broken home. His parents had got divorced when he was still a little boy, and he had gradually adopted an anti-social and especially anti-left-wing and far-right ideology. He had even for some years been a member of Norway's leading populist right-wing party, the Progress Party, which has been heavily critical of multiculturalism, globalism, ethnic and racial tolerance, and especially allowing immigrants and refugees from Muslim-majority countries into Norway. It has considered all these policies as attacks on what it has called the traditional Norwegian culture. Such parties, political parties and movements currently abound in Europe. For example, Norway's two Scandinavian or Nordic neighbors, Sweden and Finland, have such parties. In Sweden, the Sweden Democrats are the third largest party in the parliament. In Finland, the so-called True Finns or Finns party is the second largest party in parliament. And indeed in Finland, it's possible or even likely that the Finns are able to win the 2021 municipal elections, which should be held in April, but might be postponed because of the pandemic. That remains more uncertain. And well, Denmark, yes, of course, Denmark is also Norway's neighbor. In the south, Denmark has the Danish People's Party, which is also one of the main parties in that country's parliament. Interestingly enough, however, since 2013, the Progress Party has been in coalition with the so-called Høyre, or conservative, both of which are legal in Norway. However, on economic policies, it is more conservative, and Norway's current prime minister is Erna Solberg of the Høyre party, has been able to apparently tame, to some extent, the extremist tendencies of the Progress Party. Obviously, following these attacks, the Progress Party was quick to disassociate itself from Mr. Breivik. And indeed, Mr. Breivik, under his police investigation, claimed that he left the Progress Party because, in his opinion, it did not go far enough in opposing the Islamicization of the Norwegian culture and in defending the Norwegian cultural values. In his lengthy manifesto entitled Europe 2083, in which he claimed that he was basically a noble activist fighting to save Europe's Christian culture, he was honest enough to admit the possibility that he might not be a personal believer in Jesus Christ. However, he claimed to be a so-called cultural Christian. And of course, his actions desecrated that term's meaning because there was nothing Christian in his actions. Sorry. He marked in prison his 42nd birthday. Since July 2012, he has been incarcerated, having been convicted of mass murder causing a fatal explosion and terrorism. Yeah, he actually was a member of the Progress Party from 1999 to 2006. He joined a gun club while also founding a company which he used to finance his planned terrorist attacks. Sorry. Yeah, actually, the verdict was pronounced by the Oslo District Court on August the 24th, 2012, finding him sane, although the court-ordered psychiatric examination had discovered him to have a narcissistic personality disorder and an antisocial personality disorder. So he was sentenced to 21 years in prison in the form of preventive detention. In other words, he will first be eligible theoretically for parole in August 2022, if we count time from his sentencing. If we counted time from his actual surrender to the police, then technically, theoretically, he would be eligible for release already this coming July. Although this, of course, given the fact that he has never shown the least bit of remorse for his crimes, is extremely unlikely. So his incarceration or imprisonment can be extended by up to 5 years at a time, as long as enough members of the jury in the relevant court believe that he is still dangerous to the wider society, and this is likely to continue for the foreseeable future. He had the audacity in 2016, during his imprisonment, to sue the Norwegian Correctional Service, claiming that his solitary confinement supposedly violated his human rights. A subsequent court ruling found that his human rights had not been violated, despite an earlier ruling, and in June 2017 he filed a complaint to the European Court of Human Rights, which dismissed his case in June 2018. Since his imprisonment, he has identified himself as a fascist and a Nazi who practices Odinism, an ancient Scandinavian religion, and uses counter-jihadist rhetoric to support ethno-nationalists. Yeah, when he was just 1 year old, so in 1980, his parents, Mr. Jens David Breivik, born in 1935, a civil economist who worked as a diplomat for the Norwegian embassy in Britain and later in France, and his late mother, Mrs. Behring, who lived from 1946 to 2013, divorced. His mother was given custody of him, and when he was 4, that is in 1983, living in Fritzners Gate in Oslo, 2 reports were filed expressing concern about his mental health, concluding that he should be removed from parental care. The psychologist in one of the reports made a note of the boy's peculiar smile, suggesting it was not anchored in his emotions, but rather a deliberate response to his environment. In another report by psychologists from Norway's Center for Child and Youth Psychiatry, SSBU, his mother was described as having sexualized him, of having hit him, that is, beaten him physically, and of having frequently told him that she wished that he was dead. Mrs. Behring was described as a woman with an extremely difficult upbringing, borderline personality disorder, and an all-encompassing, if only partially visible, depression, who projected her primitive, aggressive, and sexual fantasies onto her son. However, the psychologist who wrote the report was later forbidden to give evidence in court by Behring, who herself was excused from testifying on health grounds. He completed elementary and junior and senior high school and Oslo Commerce School, graduating from the last mentioned institution in 1998. According to a former classmate, Mr. Breivik was intelligent, physically stronger than others of the same age, and often took care of people who were bullied. His parents were officially divorced when he was 12, that is, in 1991. His mother remarried to an officer in the Norwegian army, while his father also remarried in France. I'm sorry, rather, his father had already remarried in France, and but also his second marriage ended in divorce in 1991. He chose to be confirmed into the Lutheran Church of Norway, which is Norway's national church, at the age of 15 in 1994. According to this Wikipedia article about him, he began to behave in a more rebellious way as a teenager. In his early teen years, so in the early 1990s, he was a prolific graffiti artist, part of the hip-hop community in Oslo West. He was caught by the police on several occasions. Child welfare services were notified once, and on 2 occasions he had to pay a fine. According to Breivik's mother, he was caught spraying graffiti on walls in 1995, aged 16, and fined, and after that his contact continues. According to, so this was according to Breivik's late mother. The opposite view, however, is claimed by Breivik's father, who claimed that he broke his contacts with the father. At this age, he also ended his contact with Oslo West's hip-hop community after one of his friends had abandoned him, or vice versa. Since his adolescence, he had spent much time on weight training and started using anabolic steroids. He cared a lot about his physical appearance and about appearing big and strong. He has criticized his parents for supporting the policies of the Norwegian Labour Party and his mother for being, in his opinion, a moderate feminist. He was exempted from conscription to military service in the Norwegian army and therefore had no formal military training. The Norwegian Defense Security Department, which conducts the vetting process, says that he was considered unfit for service at the mandatory conscript assessment. After the age of 21, he was in the customer service department of an unnamed company working with people from many countries and being reportedly kind to everyone. A former co-worker described him as an exceptional colleague, while a close friend of his said he had usually a big ego and would be easily irritated by people who were of Arab or South Asian origin. He visited Belarus, which is Europe's most dictatorial country, only once as a tourist in 2005, apparently to encounter a woman whom he had met on a dating website. And this woman later visited him in Oslo. He himself has claimed that in 2002, when he was 23 years old, he started a 9-year plan to finance the attacks which he carried out in July 2011. So if he's correct, this was a 9-year project. So he established his own computer programming business, once again according to his account, while working at the customer service company. He has claimed that he had up to 6 employees and several offshore bank accounts, and that he made his first million kroner, the krone is Norway's currency, at the age of 24. However, according to his manifesto, he lost 2 million kroner on stock speculation, but still had about 2 million kroner to finance the attack. Later, the company was declared to be bankrupt, and he was reported for several breaches of the law. Then he moved back to his mother's home to save money, according to his account. The first set of psychiatrists who evaluated him after his confinement, said in their report that his mental health deteriorated at this stage and he went into a state of withdrawal and isolation. In 2007, his declared assets were about 630,000 kroner, or 76,244 US dollars, according to the Norwegian tax authority figures. He himself has claimed that by 2008 he had about 2 million kroner, or 243,332 US dollars, and 9 credit cards, giving him access to 26,000 euros in credit. In May 2009, aged 30, he established a farming company under the name Breivik Geo Farm, described as a farming sole proprietorship set up to cultivate vegetables, melons, roots, and tubers. In 2010, he visited Prague, the Czech capital, in an attempt to buy illegal weapons. Since he was unsuccessful in this attempt, he decided to get weapons through legal channels in Norway. He bought one semi-automatic 9mm Glock 34 pistol legally by demonstrating his membership in a pistol club, in the police application for a gun license, and the semi-automatic Roger Mini-14 rifle by possessing a hunting license. His manifesto included writings detailing how he played video games such as World of Warcraft to relax and Call of Duty Modern Warfare 2 for training stimulation. In April 2012, during his trial, he told a court that he trained for shooting using a holographic device while playing Call of Duty. He claimed that it had helped him gain target acquisition. In 2009, he had no declared income. However, his assets amounted to 390,000 kronor or 72,063 US dollars, according to the Norwegian tax authority figures. He has stated that by January 2010, his funds were depleting gradually. On June the 23rd, 2011, 1 month before these tragic attacks, he paid the outstanding amount on his 9 credit cards so he could have access to funds during his preparations. Either in late June or early July 2011, so just weeks before the attacks, he moved to a rural area south of Åsta in Åmot, Hedmark County, about 140 kilometers northeast of Norway's capital, Oslo, the site of his farm. As he admitted in his manifesto, he used this company as a cover to legally get large amounts of artificial fertilizer and other chemicals for the manufacturing of explosives. The farming supplier sold Breivik's company 6 tons of fertilizer in May 2011. According to the Norwegian newspaper Verdens Gang, or literally the world's going or the world's progress, after Breivik had bought a small quantity of an explosive primer from an online shop in Poland, his name had been among the 60 passed to the Police Security Service, PST, by the Norwegian Customs Service as having used the store to buy products. Tragically, no action was taken until it was too late to save those 77 people whom he massacred on that fateful July day in 2011. Speaking to the newspaper, Mr. Jon Fitje of PST said the information they found gave no indication of anything suspicious. He set the cost of the preparations for the attacks at 317,000 euros, of which 130,000 had come from Mr. Breivik's own funds, and then 187,500 euros had been in lost revenue over 3 years. According to Breivik's farmer neighbor, Breivik looked like a city dweller, wearing expensive shirts and knowing nothing about the rural or countryside culture. He also covered up the windows of his house. The local bar's owner, who once worked as a profiler of passengers' body language at Oslo airport, said that Mr. Breivik did not behave unusually in any way. He occasionally dropped in for drinks in the bar. So fast forward to July the 22nd, 2011. It was the deadliest terrorist attack in Norway since World War II, when Norway was occupied by Germany for 5 years, starting in April 1940. So at 3:25 local time on July the 22nd, 2011, Breivik's bomb detonated in Regeringskvartalet, or the government block in central Oslo. The bomb had been placed by him in a white Volkswagen Crafter and parked in front of the H block, housing the office of the Prime Minister, Justice Ministry, and the police, and several other government buildings or governmental buildings such as the Petroleum and Energy Ministry, Finance Ministry, Education and Research Ministry, and the Norwegian Supreme Court. He stopped the van at about 3:14 p.m. local time, 200 meters before the H block. And then it stood still with the hazard warning lamps for 1 minute and 54 seconds. He then drove the last 200 meters and parked the van in front of the main entrance of the main government building. The parking happened at 16:30 p.m. local time. He opened the door 16 seconds later, and after another 16 seconds later exited the van. He stood outside the van for 7 seconds before quickly walking away towards Hammersborg Tori, a market square where he had another car parked. And in order to fool the people, he was dressed like a police officer. This is quite a regular tactic. This was used, for example, by the murderous denturist Gabriel Wortman in Nova Scotia, Canada, in April 2020. He massacred 22 people, most of them in a party where he had started to argue with his common-law wife, and then 9 more people the following day before he himself was shot dead by a real police officer. So being dressed in a fake police uniform and having a gun in his hand and even a police helmet with a face shield covering his face, he was not positively identified. The explosion started fires in the H block and R4, and the shockwave blew out of the windows on all floors, as well as in the house of the major Norwegian daily newspaper, Verdens Gang, one of the major ones, and other buildings on the other side of the square. At 3:26 p.m., the Norwegian police, or the Oslo police anyway, received the first message about the explosion, and at 3:28 p.m. local time, the first police patrol reportedly arrived at the scene. At the same time, news agency NTB was told that Prime Minister Stoltenberg was unhurt and safe. A witness called police at 3:34 p.m. to report a person in a police uniform holding a pistol in his hand entering an unmarked vehicle of Fiat Doblo. Information including the vehicle's license plate number and description of the suspect was written on a yellow note and hand-delivered to the police operations central, where it lay for 20 crucial minutes before the witness was phoned back. The license plate number tragically was not transmitted on the police radio until 2 hours later. After the explosion, police cleared the area and searched for any additional explosive devices. And through media outlets, police urged citizens to evacuate central Oslo. Police later announced that this bomb was composed of a mixture of fertilizer and fuel oil, or ANFO, similar to that used 16 years earlier in the Oklahoma City bombing in the United States. Many security cameras, caught the explosion. So the area was cordoned off and evacuated. However, Mr. Breivik had already escaped. The Oslo Metro, the subway service there, remained operational. Most of the Oslo tram network was also running, although not regularly, except for the line through Grensen, the street between Professor Aschhaug's Place and Stortorvet. Buses also remained operational. According to an email with the CBC from a traveler, the local police were conducting searches in suspicious cars on the road to Oslo Airport, Gardermoen, which remained open. The Gardermoen line between Lillestrøm and Oslo Airport was shut down after a suspicious package was found near the tracks. Approximately 1.5 hours after the Oslo explosion, Breivik, still dressed in his fake police uniform and presenting himself as Martin Nielsen from the Oslo Police Department, boarded the ferry MS Torbjørn at Utøykaia in Tyrifjorden, a lake some 32 kilometers northwest of Oslo, to the island of Utøya, where every summer, except probably in 2020 because of the pandemic, the Norwegian Labour or Social Democratic Party's young people have held their summer camp. There were already media reports that the young people and their supervisors knew, but the supervisors, in order to calm the young people down, told them that they were safe on the island. So, after falsely identifying himself as a police officer who had come over for a routine check following the bombing in Oslo, Breivik was met by Miss or Mrs. Monica or Monica Böse, the camp leader and island hostess, who probably became suspicious and contacted Mr. Trond Berntsen, the security officer on the island, before Breivik killed both of them. Had they been able to warn the others, then probably at least some tens of lives could have been saved. Then Breivik signaled and asked people to gather around him before pulling weapons and ammunition from a bag and firing at random, killing and wounding numerous people. He first shot people on the island and later started shooting at people who were trying to escape by swimming across the lake. Survivors on the island described the scene of terror. Survivor Dana Barzingi, who was then 21 years old, described how several victims wounded by Breivik pretended to be dead, but he came back and shot them again. Amazingly, Mr. Breivik spared an 11-year-old boy who had lost his father, Trond Berntsen, during the shooting and stood up against him and said he was too young to die, as well as a 22-year-old man who begged for his life. So he was not totally hardened. So there was some sense of pity and mercy, amazingly enough, left in him. Some witnesses hid in undergrowth and lavatories, communicating by text message to avoid revealing their positions. The mass shooting lasted for around 1.5 hours. It only ended when, at last, a delayed police special task force arrived and Mr. Breivik surrendered, despite having ammunition left at 6:35 p.m. local time. He used hollow point or frangible bullets, which increased tissue damage, probably in order to kill even more people. He reportedly shouted, "You are going to die today, Marxists." Böse's husband and one of her daughters, who were also present, survived. The youngest victim, New Zealand-born Sharidin Svebak Bøhn of Drammen, was 14 years old. 16-year-old Andrine Bakkene Espeland of Sarpsborg was the last victim nearly 1 hour after the shooting began. Residents in a flotilla of motorboats and fishing dinghies sailed out to rescue the survivors, who were pulled out shivering and bleeding from the water because, after all, there was a cold front in that part of Norway with chilly and rainy weather, and naturally the water was also notably cold. And picked up from hiding places in the forest on the island and behind rocks around the island shoreline. Some survived by pretending to be dead. Several campers, especially those who knew the island well and were good swimmers, swam to the island's rocky west side and hid in the caves, which can only be accessed from the water. Others were able to hide away on the secluded Kjærlighetsstien or love path. 47 of the campers sought refuge in the skolestua, or the schoolhouse, or school hut, or cabin, together with personnel from the Norwegian People's Aid. Although Breivik was able to fire 2 bullets through the door, he could not break down the locked door, and the people inside this building fortunately survived. The teenagers decided that they just wanted to escape from the gunman because they judged him too difficult to stop. Well, theoretically, had they been armed, then more lives and trained how to use the weapons properly, more lives could have been saved. But without police officers stationed on the island or guards, at least several of them, um, at least some probably would have died. Tragically enough, in any case. So they were able to discover a cave-like opening in a rock where they hid 23 children from Breivik. Jamayev, who kept guard outside, also dragged 3 youngsters from the lake who were about to drown. So, much to his grief and anger, uh, Mr. Breivik was unable to assassinate former Norwegian Prime Minister Brundtland, who had already left the island. According to Mr. Breivik, because of delays related to the renovation of Oslo Central Railway Station, he arrived after she had already left. And because many of those young people adored Mrs. Brundtland, had she still been there, there could have been even over 100 victims. So we can see that even though naturally we are deeply grieved that 77 lives were lost, killed, ended by this wicked man, God still did spare many lives on that day. He fired the first shot, he meaning Mr. Breivik, not God, of course, at 5:22 p.m. local time. 2 minutes later, at 5:24 p.m. local time, the emergency medical services were informed about the shooting. And at 5:25 p.m. local time, the police in Oslo were informed. And they tried to reach Utøya as quickly as possible. Unfortunately, probably due to July being the main summer month, also in the Norwegian police services, they did not have a helicopter that could have taken them straight to the island. Had they had such a helicopter, they could have saved at least tens of lives, possibly even all of the ones who were a target, or well, tens of lives anyway. By 5:30 p.m. Delta, the police tactical unit in Oslo were on their way to Utøya by car. One of the first to arrive on the scene was Marcel Gleffe, a German resident of Ski, staying at Utvika camping on the mainland. He recognized gunshots and piloted his boat to the island and started to throw life jackets to young people in the water, rescuing as many as he could in 4 or 5 trips, after which the police, interestingly enough, asked him to stop. The major British newspaper, the Daily Telegraph, credited him with saving up to 30 lives. Mr. Hege Dalen and Mrs. Toril Hansen, a married couple on vacation in the area, were able to rescue another 40. Mr. Dalen was helping from land, while Mrs. Hansen and the neighbor camper made several trips to rescue people in the water. Mr. Kasper Ilaug, who made 3 trips to the island, also saved several dozen young people. He lived in that area and received a telephone call that something terrible was happening in Utøya and requesting help. At first, he thought the call was a prank, but fortunately enough, acted anyway. Altogether, about 150 people who swam away from the island were pulled out of the lake by campers on the opposite shore. So Delta reached the meeting point at 6:09 p.m. local time, but had to wait a few minutes for a boat to take them across. They at last reached Utøya at 5:25 p.m., just over an hour after Mr. Breivik had started his murderous shooting rampage. When confronted by the heavily armed police on the island, Mr. Breivik at first hesitated for a few seconds. When an officer yelled, "Surrender or be shot," he surrendered. Obviously, some right-wing extremists would have wanted him to die as a so-called martyr to their wicked and diabolical cause. Breivik called the 112 emergency phone number at least twice to surrender at 6:01 and 6:26 p.m. and continued killing people in between. The police say or said that Breivik hung up both times. They tried to call him back but could not reach him. When the police arrived at the scene, they were met by survivors begging the officers to throw away their weapons because they were afraid that the men in uniforms would again open fire on them. So 69 people were killed on Utöya, and of the 517 survivors, 66 were wounded. The Norwegian police, unfortunately, at the time did not have helicopters suitable for transporting groups of people for an airdrop. And according to this Wikipedia article, I don't know when this has last been edited, the one helicopter they have is useful only for surveillance, and the helicopter crew, probably because of the summer holiday month, were on leave. When the local police arrived at Utöya, under 30 minutes after the first shot was fired, they could not find a suitable boat to reach the island. So they were ordered to observe and report. AUF's own ferry, the 50-passenger Ebbnes Torbjörn, was used by Breivik to go to Utöya. Shortly after the first shot was fired by him, 9 people were leaving the island on the ferry, among them the AUF, or the Norwegian Labour or Social Democratic Party's Youth Federation leader, Mr. Eskil Pedersen. He feared there might be more terrorists in the area and navigated the ferry 2.7 kilometers to the north. And tragically, because of that, although the maneuver saved his life and that of several other people, the ferry was not available to the police when they arrived at Utöya, which is the normal ferry landing on the mainland. Therefore, the police had to use their own rigid-hulled inflatable boat, or RHIB. On that particular day, July the 22nd, 2011, this boat was located in Hönefoss and had to be transported to the lake and launched before it could be used. When Delta boarded the RHIB, it took on some water, and after a few hundred meters, the engine stopped, probably because of water in the fuel. 2 minutes later, they took over a civilian boat that was sent to assist them. A minute or two after the video ended, a faster civilian boat arrived to help. 4 Delta officers boarded the boat, and the civilian couple took the police to Utöya. Some people naturally have criticized the Norwegian police for not using a helicopter, for not immediately getting into small boats, and for endangering the couple who drove the civilian boat. On arriving in Utöya, the police arrested, in addition to Breivik, Mr. Anzor Jukayev, an innocent 17-year-old survivor who represented the Akershus branch of the Norwegian Labour Party's youth organization. Reportedly, this innocent teenager was stripped naked and locked up in a jail cell located only meters away from the cell housing Mr. Breivik. The victim, who as a child had witnessed mass murders in Chechnya, a breakaway region of Russia in the Caucasus Mountains, I think. Yes, North Caucasus Mountains, was suspected of being an accomplice because his haircut was different from that shown on his identity document, and because he did not react to the carnage with the same tears and hysteria as most of the other survivors. Well, since he had witnessed such murders in Chechnya as a child, he had apparently developed more emotional strength or fortitude against them. This is my assumption. And he was kept in custody for 17 hours. Lawyer Harald Stabel criticized, and rightly so, the police for failing to contact the youth's family, who feared he was dead or killed, and for interrogating the victim without a lawyer present. The attacks were the deadliest in Norway since World War II, and a survey found that 1 in 4 Norwegians, that is over 1 million people projected to the entire population, knew someone affected by the attacks. This attack, almost 10 years later, still remains the 5th deadliest terrestrial or on-land terrorist attack in Western Europe, behind the Bologna bombing in Italy in 1980, the Nice attack in France in 2016, the Paris terrorist attacks in France in November 2015, and the Madrid train bombings in Spain in 2004. In Oslo, 6 of the 8 victims killed by the explosion died immediately from the explosion, shockwave, and debris. 2 others died quickly afterwards from their wounds. Of the 325 people estimated to have been in the government buildings around them and in the surrounding area, at least 209 people were physically injured. 12 people received more serious injuries. Prime Minister Jens Stoltenberg of the Norwegian Labour Party was at his official residence near the Royal Palace, so actually not vacationing, preparing the speech he was scheduled to give at Utøya on July the 23rd, 2011, when incidentally in London, Britain, a young, talented, but profoundly troubled British Jewish pop, rock, and rhythm and blues singer, Amy Winehouse, died of alcohol poisoning at the age of 27. Norway's finance minister, Mr. Sigbjørn Johnsen, was on vacation in Denmark at the time. Fewer people than usually were in the area because the bombing took place during July and it happened to be Friday afternoon. So most government employees had gone home for the weekend. At first, it was very confusing what had happened on Utøya. The 2 primary Norwegian television networks, NRK1 and TV2, broadcast a live press conference from the Central Police Station, or Sentrum Politistasjon, in Oslo, where Norway's National Police Commissioner, Mr. Øystein Mæland, stated that at least 80 people had been killed on Utøya. And he also indicated that more would be found dead. But it was then revised to eventually to 69 on July the 29th, because on that day, one of the severely wounded victims from Utøya died in a hospital. Of the 69 people who died of the attack on Utøya, 57 were killed by 1 or more shots through the head. 67 people were killed or fatally wounded by gunshots. 1 died falling from a cliff trying to escape, and 1 drowned trying to swim away from the island. In total, Breivik, before he surrendered to the real police officers who at last arrived there, fired at least 186 shots and still had much ammunition left when he surrendered. So in the aftermath of the 564 people on the island at the time, 69 people died and at least 110 received various physical injuries. So it was a cloudy and rainy and chilly day on Utøya. The temperature was only around 14 to 15 degrees Celsius or 57 to 59 degrees Fahrenheit. The water temperature was similar. and the shortest distance to the mainland was around 600 meters. 60 people were transported to surrounding hospitals, 55 with serious to critical injuries. The people who died were from 18 of Norway's 19 counties or provinces, fylke, and also a woman from Georgia, the Republic of Georgia in the Caucasus Mountains on the borderline between Western Asia and Eastern Europe. Wounded people were from the entire Norway, including Svalbard, and together with the casualties from Oslo, an average of a quarter of Norway's population, as I've stated, knew a victim affected by the attacks, according to a survey done. The average age of people killed by Breivik on Utøya was 20. 2 of them were 14, 7 were 15, 8 were 16, and then the 2 largest age groups of those killed were 17 and 18-year-olds, with 16 and 17 fatalities, respectively, or in that order. 5 people who were 19 at the time were killed. 1 20-year-old was killed. 3 21-year-olds were killed. 2 23-year-olds were killed. And then 1 person each died from the following age groups: 25, 27, 28, and 30. 2 people who were 43 were killed. 1 45-year-old was killed, and 1 51-year-old was killed. At first, the court-ordered forensic psychiatrists concluded that Mr. Breivik suffered from paranoid schizophrenia and had been psychotic during the attacks and was criminally insane. However, newspaper debates criticized this report. It was, however, submitted and approved with no remarks by the Norwegian Board of Forensic Medicine. According to his defense attorney, Mr. Breivik initially expressed surprise and felt insulted by the conclusions in the report, stating later that this provided new opportunities. However, the court in January 2012 approved the conduct of a second psychiatric examination, which declared Breivik to be sane in April 2012, and ultimately he was then, in late August 2012, sentenced to imprisonment of at least 10 years, but renewable by 5 years at a time. He is linked to a compendium entitled 2083, a European Declaration of Independence, that contains 1,518 pages. So if that ever was printed, and perhaps it has been printed by various right-wing extremists around the world, that would be a really thick book. He used the anglicized fake form of his name, Andrew Berwick. The file was emailed to 1,003 addresses about 90 minutes before the bomb blast in Oslo. He expressed his hatred of Islam and of feminism and cultural Marxism, and generally speaking of left-wing politics. He claimed to support cultural conservatism, right-wing populism, ultranationalism, Islamophobia, far-right Zionism, and Serbian paramilitarism. He demanded the annihilation of Eurabia, spelled Eurabia, and multiculturalism to preserve a Christian Europe. So-called human rights violations. Yeah, since August 2011, when he officially was sentenced, or when, August 2011, so the month after he had been arrested, but 1 year before he was officially sentenced, He has been imprisoned in a high security section. Between the inception of high security section in 2012 and 2016, Norway had imprisoned 10 or 11 prisoners under these conditions, of which Breivik's term has been the longest. He is currently imprisoned at Skien prison, formerly known as Telemark Fengsel, Skien avdeling in Skien county or province Vestfold og Telemark. In July 2012, he transferred from Ila detention and security prison in Behring to Skien. He was, however, in Ila from September 2012 to September 2013. Since March 2014 or 2015, he has received visits from a prison visitor, a military chaplain or a priest or pastor to the Norwegian army every 2 weeks. This visitor has been paid 164,000 Norwegian kroner by the Norwegian government as of January the 1st, 2016. Before dying in 2013, his mother visited him 5 times. Researcher Mathias Gardell interviewed him in 2014. He is placed in solitary confinement and only has contact with healthcare workers and guards. So this type of isolation is what the European Court of Human Rights calls relative social isolation, according to a verdict of 2016 in Oslo District Court. In Europe, it is not uncommon to grant compensatory measures to prisoners who are being held in isolation for several years. As of 2016, he has an electric typewriter and an Xbox. However, he cannot access the internet in his cell. Previously, when the original verdict was upheld in September 2012, his permission for access to a computer without internet in his prison cell ended. In 2015, he has been enrolled in the bachelor's degree program in political science at the University of Oslo, passing 2 courses that year. He does not have internet access, so apparently he has to study by correspondence. In 2015, he claimed in a letter that harsh prison conditions had forced him to drop out of the course. According to a March 2016 statement by his lawyer, Mr. Øystein Storvik, Breivik had become a Nazi in prison. In September 2020, an application for Breivik's parole was made by Mr. Storvik. Breivik has to serve at least 10 years before parole can be considered, so theoretically, in July 2021, he could be considered for parole, but given his lack of any remorse, demonstrable remorse for his attacks, it is unlikely for him to be released anytime soon. In 2012, he planned to set up an organization he called the Conservative Revolutionary Movement, which he envisioned consisting of around 50 right-wing activists in Europe. In 2012, he spent 8 to 10 hours per day writing. He has said that he wants to write 3 books, the first being his own account of the events of the day of the attacks, the second discussing the ideology underlying his actions, and the third on his visions for the future. In November 2012, just 3 months or so into his sentence, he wrote a 27-page letter of complaint to the prison authorities about the security restrictions under which he was being held, claiming that the prison director personally wanted to punish him. Among his complaints were that his cell was not adequately heated and that he had to wear 3 layers of clothing to stay warm, that guards interfered with his strictly planned daily schedule. His cell supposedly was poorly decorated and had no view. His reading lamp was inadequate. Guards supervised him while he was brushing his teeth and shaving, and put indirect mental pressure on him to finish quickly by tapping their feet while waiting. That he was not given candies and was served cold coffee, and was strip searched daily, sometimes by female guards. Authorities only lifted one minor restriction against Breivik, his rubber safety pen, which he described as an almost indescribable manifestation of sadism, was replaced by an ordinary pen. Then he sued the Norwegian government, and he was, from March the 15th to 18th, 2016, the plaintiff in a civil trial against the government. The verdict was appealed. The appellate court rendered its verdict, and the Supreme Court of Norway decided not to hear the case. He complained about his solitary confinement, his general conditions of imprisonment, including a claim of an excessive use of handcuffs. He claimed that his solitary confinement violated his human rights and asserted that he had been subjected to degrading treatment, including hundreds of strip searches and frequent searches of his cell, including searches at night. On March the 16th, 2016, he started his testimony. He reported having been handcuffed 3,500 times. So he complained, for example, of the following issues. He had been subjected to a grip maneuver 2,300 times, where he put his hands through the slot of the door to his prison cell, and his hands had been held in place by a prison officer while the door had been swung open. While on paper he had 3 prison cells, because of the government's actions, he hardly used the training cell and the study cell. Prison officers at Ila prison could not speak to him during his first stay there, and this was the case for parts of his stay at Skien prison. Only the chief of the section was supposed to speak to Breivik. He said that starting in March 2014, he finally received the 1 hour of fellowship with prison officers. He said that claims had been made that he was allowed to prepare food, but that he was permitted only to press an egg cooker and was not permitted to put frozen pizza in the oven, that he had only done that once. He still received a prison visitor twice a month, an officer of the Norwegian Armed Forces. He complained that until December 2015, all outdoors recreation for him was in a concrete box. In December 2015, he was allowed to walk 20 minutes in the outdoors recreation area. A couple of times later, he was again allowed to do that. And thereafter, he had been permitted to recreate there every other week. He claimed that there were inspections through the slot of the door of the prison cell every 40 minutes, and every time the slot was opened, the guards demanded a sign of life, and they wanted him to shake a leg every time the slot opened. He further complained that dark film on all the windows had prevented natural light, and that it was not possible to see anything outside during large parts of the winter months of the year. He further testified about how the authorities prevented him from buying postage stamps, and how Skien prison had confiscated envelopes where the stamps were worth several thousand Norwegian kroner. He further testified if I remember correctly, that there was a too small variety of groceries in the prison's grocery store. So naturally, his complaints were dismissed. Um, although the Norwegian government was ordered to pay 330,937.5 Norwegian kroner, or 40,373 US dollars, for the plaintiff's legal expenses incurred by the court case. Um, at the time of the attacks, interesting enough, Breivik was a member of the Lodge of Saint Olaf or Saint Olaf, Sankt Olaf or Saint Olaf, at the Three Columns in Oslo, and had displayed photographs of himself in partial Masonic regalia on his Facebook profile. In interviews after the attacks, his lodge said it had only minimal contact with him, and that when made aware of Breivik's membership, Grand Master of the Norwegian Order of Freemasons, Mr. Ivar A. Skar, or Skor, issued an edict immediately excluding him from the fraternity based on the acts he had carried out and the values that appeared to be behind his attacks. According to the lodge records, Mr. Breivik took part in a total of just 4 meetings between his initiation in February 2007 and his exclusion from the order, and held no offices or functions within the lodge. He also claimed in his manifesto and during his interrogation to be a member of the Knights Templar Association. However, after an intense investigation assisted internationally by several security agencies, the Norwegian police did not find any evidence that the so-called PCCTS network existed or that the alleged 2002 London meeting ever took place. So this claim that he supposedly belonged to the Knights Templar Association probably was just a story he had made up. So let's hope and pray that there will not be any more of such attacks, if that were possible. May God bless and protect all of you.